Vincent van Gogh once said, "It often seems to me that the night is much more alive and richly colored than the day." There's no better example of this than his piece, Café Terrace at Night, with its vibrant blues and yellows and his signature radiant, starry sky. This piece has to be one of the most beautiful paintings of all time, but Van Gogh also made another night cafe scene. Let's head inside, shall we? This piece is called The Night Café. Is it beautiful?
Ew.
I wouldn't say so. Charming? Probably not. Striking? I think you could say that. Nevertheless, it's now considered one of Vincent van Gogh's greatest masterpieces. Van Gogh, on the other hand, hated this painting and called it one of the ugliest pictures I have done. But why would Van Gogh trash talk his own painting? Let's rewind to Paris in the year 1887. Van Gogh moved to the city the year prior in hopes of expanding his opportunities in the art world. He immersed himself in the art scene and became friends with other budding artists such as Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec and Paul Signac. He experimented with the ideas of the Impressionists, with their bright color palette and broad brushstrokes. But that's not the only thing he experimented with. While in Paris, he drank a lot of absinthe, a highly alcoholic drink with a yellowish-green hue. And although his art was invigorated while he was in Paris, his health went into a downward spiral. He ate poorly, smoked, and drank heavily. He was exhausted and needed out of the hustle and bustle. So a year later, in 1888, he decided to move out of the city. The truth is, he really wanted to move to Japan because he was obsessed with Japanese prints. But since this wasn't a viable option, he moved to what he thought was the next best thing: the south of France. He moved to the city of Arles in 1888 and wrote about it in a letter to his brother Theo, saying, "In all honesty, I have to add that the brothels, the charming little Arlesians on their way to their first communion, the priest in his surplice, who resembles a dangerous rhinoceros, and the absinthe drinkers strike me as being from another world." 6 months after he arrived, he spent 3 sleepless nights creating this painting. We're placed in a bar in Arles, France in 1888, and based on the clock hanging on the far wall, it's 1:15 midnight. Chairs are tossed about the edges of the room, as if unchanged from the way past patrons left them. Empty bottles and glasses linger on the tables. A few groups of people are fixed around the perimeter of the room. Van Gogh refers to these folks as night prowlers, or those that have no money to pay for lodging or are too drunk to be taken in. A billiard table sits firmly in the center of the room. Its broad shadow lies beneath it, formed by the smothering light from the lamps above. A man in white looks up at us from behind the table. A table filled with bottles and a vase of flowers rests on the back wall. The beautiful pinks and greens feel like a respite from the dissonant, clashing colors that make up the rest of the painting. To the left of it is a well-lit doorway. Our perspective of the room seems abnormally high, as if we're 8 feet tall or a fly looking down from a high part of the wall. It also seems like we can see more of the edges of the room than we should be able to, making things feel even more unsettling. And Van Gogh laid the paint on thick, making this piece feel very heavy. He wrote about the painting to his brother Theo, saying, "I've tried to express the idea that the cafe is a place where you can ruin yourself, go mad, commit crimes." He went on to say, "I have tried to express the terrible passions of humanity by means of red and green. The room is blood red and dark yellow, with a green billiard table in the middle. There are 4 lemon yellow lamps with a glow of orange and green. Everywhere there is a clash and contrast of the most alien reds and greens, and the figures of little sleeping hooligans in the empty, dreary room in violet and blue. The blood red and the yellow green of the billiard table, for instance, contrast with the soft, tender Louis XV green of the counter, on which there is a rose nosegay. The white clothes of the landlord, watchful in the corner of that furnace, turn lemon yellow or pale, luminous green. And speaking of alien, does anyone else think these lamps look like Cyclops' eyes? It's like the lamps and the man are confronting us, judging us, or maybe even encouraging us to enter. There's a feeling of emptiness and loneliness that's captured so well in this piece. This might be due to the clustering of people and objects around the space, creating these little lonely islands throughout the room, combined with wide open spaces, like the walkway leading to the back room. This lonely feeling is one that artists like Edward Hopper would go on to perfect years later. The juxtaposition of the green and red give off a feeling of instability. These contrasting colors cause the eyes to almost vibrate and not know where to look. There are a few paintings Van Gogh spoke so resolutely about as the Night Café, and I wonder what compelled him to make a piece like this. We know that he didn't like the nightlife scene, which is one of the reasons he left Paris. It's no secret that Van Gogh lived a troubled life, marked by mental health issues, financial instability, interpersonal issues, substance use problems, the infamous cutting off his ear incident. While he was in Arles, he wrote to his brother Theo saying that the process of creating a painting is where you have to think of 1,000 things at the same time in a single half hour. Afterwards, the only thing that comforts and distracts, in my case, is to stun oneself by taking a stiff drink or smoking very heavily. His stiff drink of choice happened to be absinthe. It's interesting that many of the paintings he created, including the beverage, took on a yellowish-green hue, as if the color palette is inspired by the drink itself. When he first moved to the city, Van Gogh described the people of Arles as beings from another world, and this painting, with its disorienting quality and disturbing colors, definitely make us feel like we're peeking in on a scene from another planet. But then Van Gogh makes the conscious choice to have the man in white and the Cyclops eyeballs look directly at us. The confronting stares make me wonder what Van Gogh looks like as he paints the piece. If someone was looking at him from the opposite side of the room, would he look like a night prowler too? Would he be slouched at the table accompanied by an empty glass of absinthe? Could this be why the lamps are so blurry and the perspective so disorienting? Because the painting was inspired by his immediate experience? Although Van Gogh knew how drinking affected him, he continued to do it anyway. In 1889, he wrote, "If alcohol has undoubtedly been one of the greatest causes of my madness, then it came on very slowly, and it will go away slowly too, assuming it does go, of course. Or the same thing if it comes from smoking. But I should only hope that this recovery, the frightful superstition of some people on the subject of alcohol, so that they prevail upon themselves never to drink or smoke." So although Van Gogh didn't seem to think that his substance use was the root of all of his problems, he did seem to think it exacerbated them. Van Gogh hated this painting, and a large part of me questions if his disdain for nightlife came from his own personal struggle with it, and if the same Arlesians that initially seemed like beings from another world began to look a lot more like himself. So maybe, in creating this painting, he was warning others just as much as he was reminding himself. If you would like to color your own version of this masterpiece, you can, because it has its own page in my coloring book, the Van Gogh Coloring Book. I'll include an affiliate link in a pinned comment down below if you'd like to purchase one for yourself.